Hey everyone, I'm Matt Gaunt from the Firebase team, and in this Firecast we're going to be looking at how to add Firebase Cloud Messaging, or FCM as it's known, to your web app with the new Firebase Web SDK. Now what we're going to be looking at first is how you can get an FCM token, which you'll need to actually send a push message. And then we're going to take a look at how you can show a notification when a push message is received. So first up, let's look at how we can get an FCM token.
So here we've just got a simple web app. It's just a HTML page and it's loading this JavaScript file. And here we've just got the standard Web SDK code that you get from a brand new project. And to start using messaging, what we need to do is call firebase.messaging. This will then give us access to all of the messaging service. And once we've got messaging, we need to request permission from the user to actually show notifications and send them push messages. Now this returns a promise, which means one or two things can happen. Firstly, we actually get the permission, everything's good, and we can actually start moving forward. The alternative is the user denies it, in which case we get an error. In which case you have to update your UI or kind of indicate to the user, hey, you've denied this, so we can't send you any push messages. So here we're just gonna show an error. So if I refresh the page now, what we're going to get is this show notifications dialog. And all this means is the user then has the opportunity to say yes or no. So in this case, we're just going to say allow. If I refresh the page, you'll notice we always get permission granted, which is great. So before we move on to the next step of actually getting a token, there's one thing we need to do. We need to create a service worker file. In this case, we need to just put it at the root of our domain and call it firebase-messaging-sw.js. And at the moment, we're just going to leave it. It's going to be an empty file. Nothing's going to happen to it. But the messaging service is actually going to look for that file. So make sure it's available. So now what we can do is we can go return messaging.getToken. And that's going to return another promise. So we can just add it to the chain. And I'm going to log it just for the sake of this demo, but normally you'd want to send it to your server so you can actually send a message to that token later on. So once I refresh the page, we get this token. Now this is what you'd actually use for sending messages to the user. So like I said, in this case, send it to your server, and then later on when you want to trigger a push, you'd be basically using the FCM API with this token.
So now that we've got an FCM token, we pass that to our application server, which will then send to the FCM servers, and their job will be to make sure that message arrives on the user's device. So the next thing for us to look at is how do we actually show a notification when that message arrives? So the first thing to call out is that there's two ways that the message is going to arrive. First, if the web page isn't visible or the browser's closed, the message will actually be received in your service worker file. That's the point that you actually need to show a notification. If the user currently has the web page open, the push message will actually be received inside your web page. And at that point, you can show a badge or a toast, whatever you want, just to make sure they know that the event has occurred. So let's see how we implement this.
So now that we've got a token, it's moved to our server, we can actually start sending push messages. How do we actually deal with those messages and actually make it do something? Well, the way we do that is we import Firebase into our service worker file. And we do that via the import scripts function. So here we're calling import scripts. We're using the Firebase SDK like you did in the page. But rather than adding firebase.js like we normally would, we're going to add firebase-app.js. Now, the reason for this is the only bit we actually need is messaging. So we import firebase-app, which is just bare bones Firebase. And then we also want to add firebase-messaging. It's exactly the same URL, but we're just pulling in just the messaging bits, which is all we need. So now that we've got the Firebase SDK inside our service worker and it's all imported and fine, the first thing we need to do is initialize Firebase. This is exactly the same as we did in our page. This is just so Firebase is ready and good to go. Then we're going to call firebase.messaging again. And because it's inside a service worker, it can pick that up, and it's actually just going to set up the SDK. So whenever a push message is received, it can already start working on it. And before we actually send anything, there's one thing we're going to add to the page, which is messaging.onMessage. Now, the reason we're going to do this is because if the user's already got the web page open, it makes more sense for them to basically receive the message in the page than it does to just show a notification, because that's just going to be super annoying. If you're already on the page and it's showing up other random bits of UI, it's not good. So in this case, we're just going to log it to the console, but you could pretty much do anything you want, whether you show a little notification badge or something else. It's entirely up to you. So here we're just going to log it, and let's show an example of what's going to happen when we send a message with the web page open. So here I'm going to send notification payload, and the SDK is smart enough to know that when a notification is sent, it should either send it to the page or it should just generate a notification for you with the title hello and the body world. So I'm just going to copy a curl command that's just going to make the API call to FCM. And make sure I've refreshed the page so it's got all the latest changes, and send. And here you can see we've got the on message event being called, and we've got our notification data right there. So if you wanted to do anything with the message in the page, you could, or obviously you can just ignore it. It's entirely up to you. But if I move away from the page is no longer visible, we should show a notification, at which point, when we send the same message, we actually get this notification come up saying hello world and icon, which is super awesome. And there's some other fields you can actually set on that, which we'll link to in the docs. So the only other thing worth covering at this point is data payloads. So if you only ever send notification data, you don't actually need to worry about this. But if you do need to send data and you actually want to manage showing notifications like inside the service worker, this is what you'd need to do. So here I'm going to send another notification, but I'm going to send data with status, woohoo, it works. So inside our service worker, to add support for this, we need to call set background message handler. And it's very much like on message. The only difference is this will only ever be called if the user is not currently on your web page. So all we need to do is we need to show a notification, and we need to make sure we return the promise for show notification. So self.registration.show notification. And this is just a normal web browser API for displaying notifications. It takes the title and some options. So the title in this case is going to be hello world, and for the options we're going to make it use some of the data from the message that we're actually going to send. So we're going to set the body to payload.data.status because that's what we're going to send. And this is a really simple basic example, but you could do anything you want. Just make sure you return the self.registration.show notification promise. So once we've done this, I'm going to copy the curl command like we did before, and I'm going to refresh the page so all of our changes are in, and just send another message. Now, just like before, we've got our on message being called because we're already on the web page. And the main difference is we've got the data with status woohoo, it works this time. And now if I go away, send the same message, this time we've got our own notification shown up where we've got complete control over it.
So that's it, Firebase cloud messaging on the web. Please leave your questions in the comments below, or reach out on Twitter or G+ with the hashtag AskFirebase. Now we're adding new Firecasts all the time, so be sure to hit the subscribe button. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Cheers.